Windsor was supposed to provide privacy, distance, and silence. Instead, one closed-door retreat produced a confession so personal that senior royal staff were instructed never to repeat it outside the room. Now that silence has collapsed. According to the fictionalized premise of this story, staff accounts reveal that Prince Harry admitted something about his separation from the family that completely changed how those present understood his anger, his choices, and his years away. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Harry had entered the Windsor retreat expecting difficult questions, but not the kind that forced him to examine what remained beneath years of distance. The gathering had been deliberately kept away from cameras and ceremonial duties. A royal household, meaning the small network of staff who organize and support a senior royal's official and private responsibilities, had restricted attendance to Charles, William, Harry, and only a few trusted aides. Phones stayed outside, notes were limited. Everyone understood why. This was meant to be a family conversation, not a public negotiation. Then Harry said the sentence that changed the room. Beneath the grievances, interviews, arguments, and years spent building a life away from Britain, he admitted that returning fully to royal life frightened him for one private reason. It would force him to confront how badly he still wanted acceptance from his father and brother. According to the dramatized staff account, that confession would later become the central detail leaked from the retreat. Charles did not interrupt. The king simply listened, and that silence unsettled his younger son more than resistance would have. Harry had prepared himself for criticism. He had not prepared for the possibility that his father might understand the pain beneath the anger. William reacted differently. The prince sat opposite his brother, with his hands clasped tightly together. When Harry admitted that he had spent years convincing himself he no longer needed the family, William looked down instead of answering. That small reaction carried its own history. Harry continued. Some of his harshest public moments, he admitted, had not come from anger alone. They had come from disappointment that private reconciliation never unfolded on the terms he once imagined. Distance had protected him from rejection, but it had never erased the desire to be wanted. One senior staff member immediately understood how dangerous those words were. Notes were gathered. Attendees were reminded that nothing spoken inside Windsor could leave the room. But someone remembered almost every word, and the reason that person eventually broke ranks was tied to an older wound between the two brothers. Because before anyone could understand why Harry finally said those words, they had to understand the three people sitting around him and why each heard an entirely different confession. The most explosive part of the Windsor retreat was not that Harry spoke, it was who had to listen. Across one private room sat a father carrying the burden of the crown, an heir trained to protect the institution, and a younger son who had spent years defining himself outside it. Every sentence, therefore, carried two meanings: what Harry believed he was finally explaining, and what Charles and William believed they were finally hearing. Harry entered Windsor, guarded but determined. In this dramatized account, he saw the retreat as perhaps the last realistic chance to speak without advisors, cameras, or competing public narratives shaping every sentence. William arrived with a harder expectation. The prince wanted clarity, not emotional theater. Charles wanted something else entirely. Enough honesty between his sons to stop distance from becoming permanent. The crown, meaning the monarchy as an institution, rather than simply the person wearing it, hung over the conversation, even when nobody named it. Harry began strongly, explaining how years of conflict had changed the way he understood his place in the family. Then Charles asked one question. "When did you decide we had stopped being your family?" Harry hesitated. The king removed his glasses and placed them beside him. He did not challenge his younger son. He did not defend himself. He simply waited. That gentleness made the moment harder, because Harry had prepared for resistance and argument. He had not prepared for his father to give him space to answer. Harry finally admitted that the separation had not happened in one dramatic instant. It had grown through silences. Messages unanswered quickly enough. conversations that felt guarded, moments when he believed William had chosen caution over brotherhood. The Duke understood that others might remember those moments differently, but to him, they had slowly begun to feel like rejection. William reacted sharply to that interpretation. The future king remembered several of those same episodes as attempts to prevent arguments from becoming worse. What Harry had experienced as abandonment, William had believed was restraint. Then came the revelation that struck deeper. Harry admitted he had expected his brother eventually to contact him privately and come after him emotionally. Not through officials, not through formal messages. He had imagined William calling simply as a brother and refusing to let the separation stand. That call never came. William looked at him with a mixture of frustration and disbelief, because there had been one moment when he had almost done exactly that. Neither brother had forgotten it. And what happened after that near conversation had shaped every silence that followed. To understand why one missing conversation became so devastating, the story must return to the private encounter that convinced both brothers the other had already chosen distance. Long before Windsor, there had been another opportunity, smaller, quieter, and far more fragile. No grand reconciliation had been planned. No formal agreement was waiting to be signed. It was simply a moment when two brothers found themselves close enough to speak honestly and still walked away carrying opposite conclusions. Within the fictional narrative, that brief encounter becomes the hidden trigger behind everything Harry later admits, because both men left believing the other had refused them. Harry had already spent months communicating cautiously with the royal household through staff, rather than directly with William. A royal household, meaning the team of aides who manage a senior royal's official and private affairs, had become the bridge between the brothers. William saw those intermediaries as protection against another private conversation becoming public. Harry saw the same system as proof that family contact had been replaced by palace machinery. Each believed he was being careful. Each felt the other was withdrawing. Then came the moment neither forgot. After a private family memorial gathering at Windsor, Harry and William unexpectedly found themselves alone in a side room for several minutes. The prince knew the opportunity was fragile, but his first words landed badly. "We cannot repair this while everything becomes public." Harry went still. He heard accusation where William believed he was setting a condition for trust. Instead of staying, the Duke ended the exchange and left before either man could explain what he actually meant. William remained behind, furious with himself. He knew almost immediately that he had chosen the wrong opening. What he meant was that honesty required privacy. What Harry heard was that reconciliation would only be offered if he first accepted blame. Harry walked away carrying the opposite wound. To him, the moment confirmed his deepest fear. His brother cared more about containing the problem than understanding why the relationship had broken. Charles learned later how abruptly the conversation had ended. The king spoke to each son separately and warned that another opportunity had to be created before resentment became permanent. Neither brother rejected that idea, but neither made the first move. One courtier remembered the detail that made the failure even more painful. William asked whether Harry had already left the grounds. The question suggested he had considered following him. He did not. That hesitation followed both men into the later Windsor retreat, and when Harry finally named the abandoned encounter aloud, William had no choice but to answer for it. And once Harry named that encounter aloud, the retreat stopped being an exercise in reconciliation and became something far more dangerous. A confrontation between two completely different versions of the same past. There are family arguments that begin with shouting. This one becomes more frightening because it begins almost quietly. Harry asks William why he never followed him that day. William does not evade the question. He answers directly, and within seconds, years of resentment surface between them. Charles realizes that what began as a retreat designed to reduce tensions has reached the precise confrontation everyone feared. Yet perhaps the only confrontation that could make honesty possible. Harry brings the earlier Windsor encounter back into the room with brutal simplicity. He tells William that when his brother failed to follow him after that failed conversation, he took the silence as confirmation that their relationship had effectively ended. The prince answers that he remembered the moment very differently. He believed chasing after Harry, while emotions were already high, would only deepen the damage. Trust, he says, had become too fragile for another argument disguised as reconciliation. William leans forward. The future king tells his brother that love cannot constantly be measured by how much hurt one person is willing to ignore. He cannot endlessly prove that he cares by pretending nothing has happened between them. Harry responds immediately, "I never asked you to ignore it. I asked you to recognize me." Charles tries to step into the exchange, but his younger son asks him to let William finish. The king, carrying both the role of father and monarch, withdraws reluctantly. In that moment, the crown, meaning the institution Charles is responsible for protecting, has no useful answer. This conversation belongs to two brothers who have spent years interpreting each other through silence. Then William admits something Harry never knew. After their earlier encounter, he had written a private message. Not an official note, not language prepared by an advisor. A personal message meant only for his brother. William had considered telling Harry that he regretted how the conversation ended, and that he did not want distance to become permanent. He deleted it. William says fear stopped him. He worried that even a compassionate private sentence might eventually become another disputed detail in a public argument. Harry stares at him, stunned. The deleted message hurts, but it also changes something. For years, Harry had believed William simply had not wanted contact. Now he knows the truth was more complicated. His brother had wanted to reach toward him, and had stopped himself. That realization fractures one certainty, but creates another question. Who had helped convince William that even private communication was too dangerous to risk? The brothers had finally exposed the wound, but behind their personal mistrust stood another force entirely: the machinery surrounding the crown, and the people whose job was to protect it. Royal families do not communicate like ordinary families. Once every private sentence carries constitutional, reputational, and public consequences. That reality becomes the next painful discovery at Windsor. The conflict was personal, but the silence around it had been reinforced by advisors, security considerations, legal anxieties, and fear of another uncontrolled disclosure. Suddenly Harry sees the system he believed was excluding him, while William is forced to confront how much that same system had shaped his own caution. Harry listens as the machinery behind those silences is finally described without disguise. Household advisors, meaning the senior staff who help royals manage official duties, legal exposure, security, and public risk, could never order William or Charles how to feel. But they could warn them about timing, written records, leaks, and how a private message might later be interpreted. To palace staff, caution had become protection. To Harry, that same caution had often felt like emotional abandonment. Charles reaches for a briefing, summarizing earlier failed attempts at communication. The king reads only halfway before closing the folder. "I do not want another discussion about my sons reduced to risk management." The sentence changes the mood. Harry looks toward his father because, for the first time, he hears frustration directed not at him, but at the system surrounding all three men. Charles admits that institutional responsibility had invaded something he still considered fundamentally paternal. He had spent too much time asking what a conversation might cause, and not enough asking what silence was already doing. One advisor then acknowledges what William had hinted at earlier. The prince had been repeatedly warned that direct messages carried risk if they were later disclosed, quoted selectively, or interpreted publicly. Those warnings did not command him to remain silent, but they made silence easier to justify. William does not hide behind them. He says plainly that caution eventually became an excuse. He had been afraid of another difficult conversation, and professional advice gave that fear a respectable name: security, reputation, timing, risk. None of those words changed the fact that he had still chosen not to send the message. Harry absorbs that admission slowly. For years he had wanted accountability from his brother. Now that it had finally arrived, it did not feel like victory. It felt heavier. because William had admitted his part without demanding anything in return, and the room could no longer pretend responsibility belonged to only one side. Charles says nothing. The advisors remain silent. Harry realizes the next words have to come from him. William had accepted his share of responsibility. Now the room turned toward Harry, and silence demanded that he do the same. The most powerful confession at Windsor does not arrive loudly. Harry speaks after a long silence, when the argument has exhausted everyone in the room. He acknowledges that leaving gave him freedom, but admits that freedom never erased the emotional consequences of separation. Then comes the sentence that royal staff would later remember above everything else. He had spent years insisting he was finished with royal approval, while still being hurt whenever that approval did not come. Harry knows the contradiction as soon as he says it aloud. He had wanted distance from the institution, yet he had still wanted reassurance from the people inside it. The Duke of Sussex, a title connected to his position within the royal family, had built much of his post-royal identity around independence. But independence had not erased expectation. He could reject the system and still want his father to understand him. He could criticize the structure and still want his brother to reach across it. Charles hears something different now. The king does not mistake the confession for an apology, and he does not pretend it erases years of damage. But for the first time, Harry's anger becomes emotionally recognizable to him. Beneath the arguments had been disappointment. Beneath the disappointment had been a desire for acceptance. Harry immediately looks uncomfortable. Admitting this feels dangerous, because resentment had become part of how he understood his separation. To confess that approval still mattered feels almost like surrendering the identity he built after leaving. Charles stands. He crosses the short distance between them, then stops. The monarch does not embrace his son or force comfort into the moment. Instead, he asks quietly, "Do you want me closer?" Harry hesitates before giving a small nod. William remains where he is. The prince cannot respond as quickly, because the admission cuts in two directions. His brother had wanted connection, but he had also publicly attacked the structures William was preparing to inherit. Compassion and frustration collide inside him. Then Harry turns toward him. He admits that resentment became easier to carry than disappointment. Anger made him feel powerful. Disappointment made him feel abandoned. That sentence finally breaks William's defensive composure. He looks away, breathes slowly, and then asks the remaining staff to leave. The advisors hesitate only briefly before gathering their papers. Charles understands what is happening and follows them toward the door. For the first time during the retreat, the brothers are left entirely alone. What happened after the doors closed became the true turning point, because suddenly there was no crown, no communication strategy, and no staff, only two brothers and everything they had avoided saying. The Windsor retreat changes not during its loudest exchange, but during its quietest one. Staff leave. Charles steps away. The door closes, and for several minutes, William and Harry remain together without anyone taking notes, advising caution, or measuring consequences. Neither man can hide behind the institution anymore. According to the dramatized account, what follows is not a miraculous reconciliation. It is something smaller, and perhaps more believable. Two brothers finally admitting that both had spent years waiting for the other to move first. William speaks first, but he does not offer easy comfort. The prince tells Harry that rebuilding cannot mean pretending the past several years never happened, or expecting their relationship to return overnight to what it once was. Reconciliation, meaning the slow restoration of a damaged relationship, would require honesty without demanding instant forgiveness. Harry agrees. For once, neither brother argues over whose pain came first. Harry then asks the question he has avoided for years. Did William ever truly stop thinking of him as a brother? No, William answers. The relief lasts only seconds. The future king adds that loving someone and trusting them are not always the same thing. Harry absorbs the distinction without fighting it. The words hurt, but they also feel more honest than reassurance offered simply to calm the room. He says trust cannot be restored through promises anyway. It will have to come through actions. slowly, with neither side assuming the worst before the other speaks. Then William reveals one final detail about the deleted message. He had not written it and erased it immediately. He had left it sitting in his drafts for nearly an hour, reading it again and again, trying to decide whether sending it would repair something or make everything worse. Harry looks at him differently. That same evening, he admits, he had checked his phone repeatedly. Neither man needs the meaning explained. William had been staring at a message he was afraid to send, while Harry had been waiting for a message he was convinced would never come. Both had wanted contact. Both had feared rejection. And both had allowed silence to become evidence for whatever they already feared most. The cruel symmetry finally becomes impossible to deny. So the brothers agree on one immediate condition. Whatever has been said at Windsor must remain private while they test whether direct communication can work without advisors standing between them. It is a fragile agreement, but it is real. And that is precisely why what happens next feels so devastating. For the first time, Windsor had produced something fragile but real, only for the outside world to discover the confession before the family was ready to explain what it meant. By morning, a deeply private emotional admission has become a public story. The irony is brutal. Harry and William had just agreed that trust could only return if their conversations stopped escaping into the outside world. Then details from the retreat appeared beyond Windsor's walls. Yet the reaction is not what either brother expects. Instead of focusing only on blame, much of the public conversation turns toward the sadness beneath Harry's confession and the years both men lost to silence. Palace staff recognized the language immediately. The words circulating outside Windsor sound too close to what had been said during the restricted discussion to be coincidence. A restricted meeting, meaning a gathering limited to a very small number of approved people, was supposed to protect exactly this kind of exchange. Now an internal effort begins to determine how the account escaped. Charles hears the news with visible disappointment. The king had watched his sons reach something fragile, and he fears the public will now reduce that progress to another family scandal. William receives the first briefing early that morning. The prince reads several lines, pauses, and places the page down. So we begin again. His frustration is not aimed first at Harry. That matters. It is aimed at the collapse of privacy itself. For years, every failed conversation had reinforced the belief that nothing personal could remain personal. Now, just as the brothers had begun testing that belief, the worst possible proof seemed to arrive. Harry reacts with the same fear from the other side. His first instinct is that the leak has destroyed everything. But the Duke does not release an angry statement. He does not accuse William. He does not answer one betrayal by creating another. Outside Windsor Castle, television crews gather as newspaper boards carry a dramatic fictional headline, Harry's private Windsor admission. I still wanted them to want me. People stop to photograph the front pages, and one painfully private sentence becomes the image of the day. Yet something unexpected happens beneath the frenzy. Neither brother attacks. No hostile counter-briefing appears from William's side. No retaliatory response comes from Harry's. The agreement they made behind closed doors survives the first pressure placed upon it. Charles notices. For the king, that restraint matters more than discovering immediately who leaked the confession. His sons have just been given every reason to repeat the old pattern, and for once they refuse. The confession could no longer be protected, but something else had survived exposure. The decision not to turn another betrayal into another battle. In the end, Windsor does not erase the past, restore perfect trust, or return Harry to the life he left behind. Its significance is more human than that. One confession forces three men to stop arguing only about institutions and begin acknowledging what separation had cost them personally. Harry admits that independence never made him emotionally indifferent. William admits caution became avoidance. Charles finally sees both sons accepting responsibility without demanding that one surrender completely to the other. Harry leaves the retreat with no formal settlement and no promise of returning to royal duties. The working structure of the monarchy, meaning the official system of senior royals carrying out public responsibilities on behalf of the crown, remains separate from the personal relationship he is trying to rebuild. That distinction becomes crucial. The Duke does not receive complete vindication, but he stops demanding it as the price of connection. His deepest admission is simpler. Rejection hurt because family still mattered. Charles accepts a lesson of his own. The king understands that fatherhood cannot always be passed through advisors, offices, or carefully managed channels. Institutional questions may remain difficult, but personal contact cannot survive indefinitely through intermediaries. He decides that whatever happens next, his relationship with Harry must sometimes exist outside palace machinery. William remains more cautious. The prince does not pretend the damage has disappeared, and he does not offer trust before it has been rebuilt. But he chooses something harder than either anger or forgiveness. He leaves a narrow door open. For the first time in years, boundaries and affection are allowed to exist together. Harry understands the difference now. Before leaving Windsor, the brothers meet once more. There is no speech prepared, and no dramatic promise about the future. William extends his hand. Harry looks at it. Then, instead of taking it formally, he pulls his brother into a short embrace. Neither man speaks for several seconds. Charles stands several steps away and watches without interfering. The monarch does not turn the moment into symbolism or instruction. For once, he lets it belong entirely to his sons. That silence means something different now. The leaked confession ultimately exposes a truth far simpler than any palace scandal. Harry had not stopped caring. William had not stopped caring either. Their tragedy was that both had mistaken fear, caution, and silence for indifference. Windsor repaired nothing completely. It did something more believable. It ended one devastating misunderstanding. The monarchy emerged neither victorious nor defeated. It emerged reminded that titles, protocol, security, and public expectation can damage the relationships they are meant to protect. And so the real shock of Windsor was never simply what Harry confessed it was, that after years of believing the bond had disappeared, father and sons finally discovered it had been wounded, guarded, and nearly buried, but never completely gone. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.